Welcome once again to the J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me on this artistic adventure. Today we'll be working with ink, pen and ink. So have your kneaded eraser, a number 2 or an HB pencil handy, and any type of ink that you would like to use. But make sure that it's archival, that it's permanent, that it's black, and a smooth ink. And let's start doing some ink drawing.
So it's good to be here today. I'm glad you're drawing with me. So the first thing we want to do is our composition. We got to figure out where everything goes. So if you think about his body kind of like a big jelly bean, and you think to yourself, well, I want his head to be up in 1/3. Remember that rule of thirds thing? If we divide our picture plane into thirds, and we say to ourselves, well, right up in here, this is where I want his head to be. So you can do a little circle and say, well, right up in there somewhere, that's his head. And his body's going to kind of go down in here somewhere. You just do that kind of jelly bean shape. And then his legs are just this kind of, there's one leg there, there's another leg that comes off of here. There's an arm that comes down here somewhere. Just simple shapes, just keep it simple. And of course he's on a little pile of snow. The snow is white, so there's very little that we're going to do there. If we want, we could draw these little sticks kind of coming out of there. But we'll worry about that later on. Any of the background, because it's all kind of soft and fuzzy, probably don't need to worry about much of the background either. So you want to utilize that whole page. You want his rear end to almost touch the edge over there. Give him just a little bit of space, more space over on the right side than on the left side. Give him a little bit of breathing space. Little triangles for the ears. Wolves have some pretty good sized ears. So right now all we're doing is trying to get our composition. Remember, just simple shapes. About right in the center of that circle I first drew. That's about where his eyes go. And if you think about where they are spaced, if you come from the ear, and maybe I need to adjust my ear a little bit, that's okay. But I'm just going to come down and do a little spot for an eye. A little spot for an eye over there. And about down towards the bottom of that circle, it's about where his nose is going to go. So you do a little round circle there. And we might have to adjust that right or left or up or down. But again, this is just trying to get our proportions. And if you wanted to put in like the little areas where his fur is a little darker, just as a guide, you could do that with a little bit of edge, a little line. You can increase or decrease any of the shapes that you see that are going to help you. Anything you think that's going to help. And then you just kind of adjust it. Just keep adjusting until you're happy with what you see. Got a little tail hanging there in the back there too, if you want to throw that in just real briefly. Now, nothing here is definitive. Nothing is perfect. Can always adjust it as we go. But we try to get it as close as we can. And remember, everything that we've drawn with this graphite is going to get erased. This is merely guidelines for our ink. If you also want to put in, like on his face, this is our most important area. This is our emphasis area. Everything else we can fudge a little bit on, but the face needs to be fairly well done. So if you want to go in and just kind of mark in where some of that gray area goes, just because you want to make that the best you can do that too. His head is actually not very round. It's more almost football shaped when you look at the sides, how they kind of come out. But we can do that. We can do that with our ink as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into his head. And remember, there's a lot of things that we're going to leave out, little edges that you leave out. Sometimes you can just use a couple little dots or dashes, whatever is necessary. So the first thing we need is just some little lines underneath the eye. We know that the eye is nice and round. And as I go through, I'm just going to make sure that it's in the right place. Here's his nose. You go straight up from the edge of his nose. That's about where his eye is on both sides. This one's off just a little bit because he's looking that way, just ever so slightly. So I can come straight up and I can start with the eye, just this nice rounded look. I just did this little round underneath. And again, I'm using little dots and dashes. I don't have to do a whole line. If you're a little timid about drawing, which a lot of you are, you can just use a couple little dots and dashes. And you can also use your pencil if you want to draw a little bit in there. It's totally up to you. He's got a little triangle right towards his nose. There's a little triangle pointing like to the center of his nose. So I can put that little triangle in. Little dots and dashes, little zigzaggy lines. And then his pupil is touching the very top corner of his eyelid. So I can come up there and just ever so lightly put in this little half moon. Somewhere in there, there's got to be a highlight. So if I put that little half moon in there, then it looks like a little highlight. And technically, I mean, a few little dots and dashes and we got it. I'm going to do the same thing with the other eyes. I come over, kind of try to figure out where it goes. Want it to be very level, so maybe a couple little dots and dashes. Try to make that as level as I can. Same kind of thing. There's a little triangle of darkness there, a little dark ridge under the eye, and a little triangle that goes towards the nose. And his pupil touching the top of his eyelid. And again, I don't do a whole circle. I do this little half moon shape because I think there's got to be a shine in there. Even though I can't get close enough to see that shine, there's enough snow and light around that I'm sure there is that shine. And all this gray that's around here, I know I've got to come into that with line, but I'm going to do the darkest edges first. So there's these little dark edges over the top of the eye, underneath the eye. I'm going to do those first. Then I can do the rest of them later. I'm just doing those little soft feathered lines. They're just a little flick, 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 flick. You lay your pencil in and you just or your pen, and you do a little flick and you get this nice soft little edge, little line. And I try to go, remember animals, as you look at animals, all the fur goes from the center of the head out. So all the lines on this side are going to be facing this way. All the lines on this side are going to be facing this way. So like the little lines on this side are going to go out this way. And the lines on this side are going to go out this way. And that'll give it the illusion of fur, illusion of hair. You can turn your paper or you can just adjust your hand. So I'm just doing little sketchy lines. And you can do little dots and dashes. And those little lines, try to vary them a little bit so that they're not all going in the same direction. I flipped some up, I flipped some over. They're not all going in the same direction. That makes it kind of boring. And hair doesn't grow that way. And if you want him to feel soft and fuzzy, just leave line out. Like on the tip of his ear, this little part of his ear is so light, I may just leave it out. I may just kind of maybe a couple little dots and dashes and then leave that part out. So if I get rid of my graphite here, if I go like this, look how that edge is broken and it looks so soft. Inside his ear, very long hair. I'm just going to go back and forth. And again, don't be afraid to leave things out. The closer your line, the darker the value. Just a couple little dots and dashes. We can always come back in and add more too. So when in doubt, leave it out. You can always add more. Cool thing about this technique too is if like you get the ear too small, you can always add more. If you had done a solid line, there's no way you could add it. It would look silly. So you could add more later on. Just little dots and dashes. And this is a practice thing. I know I make it look easy, but you just practice this. It'll come. So the center of his head, there's this little dark edge there. Some of those are going to go this way, and some of them are going to go that way, to the left and to the right. And then because it's gray, we'll just add more. We'll just keep adding until we're done. But right now I want to establish my size. I want to get everything kind of the way it goes. I want to get rid of my graphite. That graphite is bugging me a little bit. Same thing on this air. If it's really light and thin, just leave it out. Little dots and dashes. And that's enough. You don't need any more for now. Later on, we might come back into it and say, oh, needs to go darker. Also, be very gentle with your pen. I'm barely touching the surface of my paper. Your pen will last longer, and you'll get a thinner, lighter line. Anything that is dark, throw it in as little dots and dashes, especially around the side of his head. Look how soft that is. There's so much you can leave out. Like I say, we may want to add more later, but just now, just get the edges so that you can get rid of that graphite. So all this stuff that's gray, I know I'm going to add more to it. But that's okay. I've got my edges. I've got my spaces done. His little nose, if you wanted to, you could just start with some little hatch lines through his nose, because you know it's fairly dark. So you can just kind of hatch through it like this. There's his nose. I know that looks kind of silly, but what I'm going to do is hatch through it the other way. There's that core shadow. And then he's got little nostrils, and you can just hatch through those. Don't draw a line where his nostrils go. They'll look like holes, which I guess they kind of are, but they're recesses. And then you just add little hatch lines however you feel like you need to. Or dots. Dots are great for noses, because the nose texture is kind of pebbly like that. Or little dashes. You can even put little dashes in between the dashes, because the more you put in there, the darker it goes. Then hopefully you'll have a nice nose. You just keep going. Here's his mouth. His mouth is just this little elongated triangle shape. And I'm just going to use little dots and dashes. The bottom of his chin, you can't even see it. Just a couple little dots and dashes. And it looks like you've got a lot of detail in there when you really don't. Now, you can, if you wanted to, move down his body and get all that. I'm going to just stay with his head just a little bit further and get some of these other gray areas in there. I'm just going to add little dots and dashes until I'm kind of happy with what I get. There's little light edges around his eye. Leave those out, and then when you come back into it, you say, well, it's not really that white. You can always add a few little dots and dashes. But for now, you can just leave it white. It's amazing what a little dot will do. Create some value. Just dots and dashes. It's very therapeutic. And these little lines, again, I'm trying to go in that direction that the fur flows and trying to keep them so they're not all the same. When you first start out, you think, okay, that's dark enough. Then when you start adding a few more lines in there, you realize, it wasn't quite dark enough. Got to add more. But when in doubt, leave it out. It's best to leave it out to begin with, and then add it in later. With all those little dots and dashes, that little bit of grayness is starting to come through. And you can always add more. Just the more line you add, the darker it's going to get. He's got just a few little dark areas. And you just keep adding line. And again, you may want to come back into it later on, because after you've drawn a little bit, you might say, needs to go darker. I'm just going to get rid of any graphite I have in his head. And that's my favorite part. To get rid of that graphite just makes it clean. Seems like the more you add to it too, the easier it is to just kind of relax a little bit. Your line tends to flow a little bit better. I don't know if you just get used to it or if it's not as important to you. Right, I know I can come back to this head, so maybe that's enough for now. I can come back into that. The body is done the same way, but without as much maybe attention to detail. I'm going to do it the same way. Little dots and dashes. I can already tell that my body needs to go a little bit bigger, a little bit longer. So I've left myself a little bit of space, and I can do that. And if I just do a couple little dots and dashes, if I need to adjust, I certainly can. Little dots and dashes, and try to get the hair to flow the direction it feels like it's going in your scrap. And if it's really light, just leave it out. There's a bunch of stuff on his chest right there that's really light. So the edge is just going to be left out. I'm just going to break that edge, leave it out completely. If it's really light and soft, just leave it out. Okay, trust me, it'll work. When you're proportioning, I like to line things up a little bit. Like his leg, the front of his leg starts at the back of his ear. So if I come straight down from the back of his ear, that's about where the front of his leg starts. So I come down in and put that little shape right there. Put that in. You don't have to be stuck with your initial drawing. And you don't even have to be stuck with your scrap. The hair on the back of his leg, so light, just leave it out. Just put a couple little dots and dashes maybe, and just leave it out. If later on you feel like you need more in there, you can. But look how kind of fun that is to have it just blend into the background. Nothing wrong with that. You can even have his foot just kind of hanging out all by itself over there. Little shapes of darkness, just to leave them there. Here's his little claw. There's another one right there. But they're not really connected to anything. But yet your eye makes that connection. It goes, oh, I see that. I see the foot. When in reality, it's really not connected. You just see the dark areas. Boy, there's a lot that we can leave out in his belly. His tail is that little dark area that's coming through the back edge. So I'm just going to let that tail define the edge of his leg. So much that you leave out. When in doubt, leave it out. And if there is a little bit that you need, just a couple little lines, little edges, little shadows. And the snow, I mean, if you wanted to do like little branches down in there, you could do these little branches, just kind of scribble them in, just to show that he's not floating. You don't want him levitating. So you do a little branch in there if you want. Maybe a dead leaf. Maybe a little shadow where the snow goes here and there. But keep it simple. Don't get too caught up in all those little tiny details. These are just little scribbles. Now I can go back into it, get rid of all my graphite. Nobody knows that I used graphite in there. Now I can go back into it and darken in certain areas that I feel like I need to. And I always start with the face, because that's the most important. Little dots and dashes, whatever you feel like you need. As you do, your lines get a little freer, a little not quite as controlled. The closer your line, the more ink you put in there, the darker the value. So just look at it and say, okay, is that dark enough? Do I need to go a little further? A little more? Remember, when in doubt, leave it out. And there's a lot that I left out that now I'm going back in going, okay, need to go a little darker with it. And sometimes you'll get to the point where you think, gosh, I'm just scribbling. That's really all drawing is just controlled scribbling. So as I get further away from the head, notice that I'm doing a lot more hatching. And this gray area that's down in his back, I can just hatch through that really quick. And then do some smaller hatching over the top of that. And there's your texture. keep going on your values, and just scribble them in as fast as you can get them. Because once you get those grays in there, it doesn't even matter which direction you go. Good place for a signature would be right there, right above that stick. That would be a good one. Or maybe right below it. But somewhere up in there would be a good place for your signature. It's the last thing you want to do to your artwork. Ink can be a lot of fun, and hope you had a enjoyable time drawing with me today. And hope you learned something. Maybe did something that you've never been able to do before. You know, a little practice, like anything else, is going to help you to get better. Art makes life better. Hope you have a lovely day.